Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, the man who spoke for a new conscience. Look at the splendor of his youth. Look at the freshness of his presence, his patience and calm, his compassion and humility, his piety and gentle heart. Look at a courage that never knew fear, a generosity that never feared poverty. Look at his purity and modesty, his truthfulness and trust. See in him every image of beauty, virtue, and greatness, and do not be surprised, for you stand before the man who most resembled the Prophet in character and in spirit. This is the one the messenger called Father of the Poor. This is the one he named the possessor of 2 wings. This is the bird of paradise, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. He was among the giants of the first generation, those who gave the greatest share in awakening the conscience of life. He came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a believer, took his high place among the earliest Muslims, and on that same day, his wife, Asma bint Umais, embraced Islam with him. Together, they carried their portion of persecution and suffering with dignity. When the Prophet permitted his companions to migrate to Abyssinia, Ja'far and his wife were among those who left. There in Abyssinia, Ja'far became the eloquent voice of Islam, its spokesman before kings. God had granted him a brilliant mind, a radiant heart, a keen spirit, and a tongue of unmatched clarity. If the day of Mu'tah, when he would later fight until martyrdom, was his most glorious battlefield, then the day he stood before the Negus of Abyssinia was no less magnificent. Quraysh had not calmed after the Muslims fled Mecca. Their rage followed them across the sea. They feared that Islam might grow in that distant land, that the exiles might find strength and safety. And even if they did not grow, Quraysh could not bear that these believers had escaped their vengeance and now lived beyond their grasp. So the chiefs of Mecca decided to send 2 envoys to the Negus, Amr ibn al-As and Abdullah ibn Abi Rabi'ah, laden with precious gifts, seeking the expulsion of the Muslims. The Negus, however, was a king of enlightened faith, a Christian of pure heart, known for justice and open spirit. Because of this, the Prophet had chosen his land as a refuge for the believers. And because of this, Quraysh feared their mission might fail. Before meeting the king, the envoys distributed gifts to bishops and church leaders, hoping to sway the court. But the decisive moment would belong not to gold, but to the words of Ja'far. The leaders of Quraysh had instructed their envoys not to appear before the Negus until they had first showered the bishops and patriarchs with gifts, hoping to win their hearts and secure their support. So the 2 emissaries arrived in Abyssinia, visiting the church dignitaries one by one, laying before them the treasures they had carried from Mecca, preparing the ground with gold and persuasion before presenting themselves to the king. When they finally stood in the royal hall, they repeated their accusation. "O king, some foolish youths from our people have fled to your land. They have abandoned the religion of their forefathers, yet have not embraced your faith. Instead, they have brought an invented creed unknown to us and to you. The nobles of their clans have sent us to request that you return them, for their own people know best what they have introduced." The Negus turned toward the Muslim refugees, his voice calm yet firm. "What is this religion for which you have left your people and not entered mine?" At that moment, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib rose. The Muslims had chosen him to speak on their behalf, trusting his wisdom and eloquence. With dignity and serenity, he addressed the king. "O king, we were a people living in ignorance. We worshipped idols, ate carrion, committed immoral deeds, severed family ties, and abused our neighbors. The strong among us devoured the weak. Then God sent to us a messenger from among ourselves, whose lineage, truthfulness, trustworthiness, and purity we knew well. He called us to worship God alone and abandon the stones and idols that we and our fathers revered. He commanded us to speak the truth, to fulfill trusts, to honor kinship, to be good to our neighbors, and to refrain from forbidden acts and bloodshed. He forbade us indecency, false testimony, consuming the wealth of orphans, and slandering chaste women. So we believed in him and followed what he brought from God. We worshipped God alone without associating partners with him. We held lawful what he made lawful and avoided what he forbade. But our people turned against us. They tortured us and sought to force us back to idol worship and to the corruption we had left behind. When they oppressed us and made life unbearable, we came to your land, seeking your protection and hoping not to be wronged in your presence. Ja'far's words shone like the first light of dawn within the palace, touching hearts and stirring consciences. Deeply moved, the Negus asked, "Do you have with you anything of what has been revealed to your prophet?" Ja'far replied, "Yes." The king said, "Then recite it to me." Ja'far continued reciting the verses from the chapter of Mary in a voice filled with reverence and grace. The words flowed through the hall like a pure stream, and the Negus began to weep. His bishops wept with him, their tears falling onto their beards as the truth touched their hearts. When the king had wiped his flowing tears, he turned to the envoys of Quraysh and said, "Truly, this message and what Jesus brought come from the same lamp. Go back, for by God I will never surrender these people to you." The assembly dispersed. God had granted victory to his servants, while the delegates of Quraysh left humiliated and defeated. Yet, Amr ibn al-As was a man of cunning and deep strategy. He did not swallow defeat easily, nor yield to despair. No sooner had he left the palace than he began to plot again. He said to his companion, "By God, tomorrow I will return to the Negus and tell him something that will uproot them completely." His friend warned him, "Do not do this. They have kinship with us, even if they have opposed our faith." But Amr replied, "I will inform him that they claim Jesus, son of Mary, is merely a servant like other servants." This was the new trap prepared for the Muslims, to corner them between two impossible choices. If they declared Jesus a servant of God, they might anger the king and the bishops. If they denied it, they would betray their own faith. The next morning, Amr returned and said to the king, "O king, they speak terrible words about Jesus." The Negus was shaken by this brief statement and immediately summoned the Muslims to ask them what their religion said about the Messiah. The Muslims realized the danger, gathered together, and consulted among themselves. They agreed with one voice, "We shall speak the truth that our prophet has taught us, without changing a single word, whatever may follow." The assembly was held once more. The Negus looked at Ja'far and asked, "What do you say about Jesus?" Ja'far rose again like a shining beacon and answered with calm certainty, "We say about him what our prophet has brought to us. He is the servant of God and his messenger, his word that he cast to Mary, and a spirit from him." The Negus struck the ground gently with his staff and declared, "By God, Jesus said no more about himself than this." The bishops murmured in discontent, yet the king continued firmly, "Go, for you are safe in my land. Whoever insults or harms you shall be punished. I would not surrender one of you for a mountain of gold." Then he turned to the envoys of Quraysh and said, "Return their gifts. I have no need of them. God did not take a bribe from me when he restored my kingdom. Shall I take one now to betray justice?" Thus the plot of Quraysh collapsed, and the refugees of faith remained under the protection of a just king, their dignity preserved and their message honored. The envoys of Quraysh departed disgraced, their faces turned toward Mecca in defeat. The Muslims, under the leadership of Ja'far, returned to their peaceful lives in Abyssinia, remaining, as they described, in the best of lands, with the best of neighbors, until God would permit them to return to their messenger, their brothers, and their homeland. The Prophet, peace be upon him, was celebrating with the Muslims the victory of Khaybar when a traveler appeared from Abyssinia, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, accompanied by those migrants who had remained there. Joy flooded the heart of the messenger of God. He embraced Ja'far and said, "I do not know which delights me more today, the conquest of Khaybar or the arrival of Ja'far." Soon the Prophet and his companions journeyed to Mecca to perform the compensatory Umrah, then returned to Medina. Ja'far's soul was filled with awe at the stories he heard of his brothers who had fought at Badr, Uhud, and other battles. His eyes overflowed with tears for those who had fulfilled their covenant with God and departed as righteous martyrs. Longing for paradise took hold of his heart, and he began to await the chance of martyrdom, watching for its noble moment. Then came the expedition of Mu'tah, whose banners rose on the horizon preparing to march. Ja'far saw in this campaign the opportunity of a lifetime, either a great victory for the faith of God or a glorious martyrdom in his path. He approached the messenger, peace be upon him, asking to be granted a place in this army. He knew with certainty that this was no small skirmish. It was a war unlike any Islam had faced before, against the armies of a vast empire possessing numbers, weapons, and resources far beyond the Arabs and the Muslims. Yet his heart flew toward it with eagerness. He became the third commander appointed by the Prophet. The army set out, and Ja'far marched with them until the two forces met on a terrifying day. Though the sight of 200,000 Roman soldiers might have filled any heart with dread, Ja'far was seized instead by a surge of proud faith. He felt the dignity of the believer and the confidence of the hero. He would fight equals and rivals, not weak foes. When the banner nearly fell from the hand of Zayd ibn Haritha, Ja'far caught it with his right hand and advanced with astonishing courage, like a man seeking not victory but martyrdom. The Roman fighters swarmed around him. Seeing his horse hinder his movement, he leapt from it and hamstrung it so none of the enemy could ride it, then plunged into their ranks like a raging storm, crying, "How beautiful is paradise, and how near! Its drinks sweet and cool and clear. The Romans, soon shall taste their doom, unbelieving, far from kin and womb. When I meet them, my sword shall strike them sheer." The enemy realized the power of this man who fought as though he were an entire army. They encircled him with frenzied determination to kill him. Blows rained upon his right arm, severing it. Before the banner could fall, he seized it with his left. They struck that arm as well. Then he embraced the standard to his chest, resolved that the flag of the messenger, peace be upon him, should not touch the ground while he yet lived. At that moment, his pure body became the pillar of the banner. Abdullah ibn Rawaha charged through the ranks like an arrow, took the standard from him, and carried it toward another glorious destiny. Thus Ja'far fashioned for himself one of the most magnificent deaths known to humankind. Thus he met the Most High, clothed in sacrifice and crowned with heroism. The All-Knowing revealed the outcome to his Prophet, who wept, entrusted Ja'far to God, and went to the house of his cousin. He gathered Ja'far's children, kissed them, and his eyes flowed with tears. The poor and needy mourned their father, for Ja'far had been called the father of the destitute. Abu Huraira said, "The best of people to the poor was Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. He had been most generous with his wealth in life, and when his time came, he was the most generous in giving his very soul." Abdullah ibn Umar said, "We searched for Ja'far at Mu'tah and found him with more than 90 wounds, between spear thrusts and sword strikes. Yet did those wounds diminish his spirit? Never. The swords and spears were only a bridge over which the noble martyr crossed to the presence of his Lord. The prophet, peace be upon him, said, "I saw him in paradise, with 2 wings dipped in blood, their tips dyed crimson. There he dwells in the gardens of eternity, bearing upon every part of his body the medals of battle, a radiant bird of heaven, Ja'far al-Tayyar, the man of 2 wings,